the Fifth Generation Leadership Podcast with Grant and Rod. Uh, yeah, let's go ahead and get started. I'd like to welcome Commander Rob Green to Fifth Generation Leadership. Just to give a quick introduction, I'll let Commander Green go into more detail. I initially got linked in with him via a mutual friend, Dr. Sam Sigaloff. And I know that Commander Green has been an absolute linchpin in the fight against the military COVID vaccine mandates. In a huge variety of ways that we may or may not get into in detail. But he's done that. I know that as we discussed in the last episode, he was a classmate of Lieutenant Commander Mark Zito, and I know that he has both experience on active duty in the Navy, but also as a government civilian. And so looking forward to kind of learning about background, learning about leadership from one of the my favorite senior leaders that I know of in the Navy.
Well, thank you very much, Grant. I appreciate that. And it's an honor to be here with you, and I'm excited to chat.
Yeah, Rob, it's nice to meet you. I've heard a lot about you. I am not entirely caught up to speed about everything that you're involved in. I kind of, when I got out of the Army, I stopped really paying attention to what was going on in the fight up until just a little bit more recently. So I'm kind of out of touch with a lot of stuff, but I'm definitely a person that has experienced it and was involved in it. But Grant has told me a lot about you. I'm super excited to hear what you have to say. It's good to have you on the show. So
yeah, it's very nice to meet you, Rodney, and I'm grateful that you guys are doing this and putting some good stuff out in the world. And my apologies, I thought that we were also going to have Chris, I believe his last name was Bray, on the line. I thought I guess I misread on a message before.
I'm sorry. I was sharing that article with you because I found it pertinent. So we'll probably get to that at some point. But that's a recent FBI guidance on threat assessment characterizing traditional Catholics as a potential rational or radical violent extremist threat.
Wild that's going on.
Yeah, exactly. So that's why I shared that with you, just because
I wonder,
it might be interesting to discuss as we go through.
Sorry, I wonder if that is implying that the majority of religious exemptions that might have came in were Catholic. Because I mean, why else would they just suddenly come out with, like, oh, Catholics all of a sudden? Maybe that's the majority that they had seen across the paperwork. Maybe
the article referenced quote unquote abortion rights specifically. So Roe v. Wade being overturned, I think is the more likely culprit, but anything's possible when you talk about ID laws. But yeah, we'll probably get to that just in the natural course of the conversation. But I want to start with just sir, what's your background? You came into the Navy, from what I'm tracking, you went to the Naval Academy. Is that correct?
That's correct. Yeah, I was a year maybe ahead of Mark Zito, who you spoke to before. But yeah, we definitely knew each other then, and talk about radicals. We were, I think I met him at the Catholic Midshipman Club at the Naval Academy. But yeah, radical is probably in my DNA a bit. I'm the oldest of 11 kids. My wife is the fourth of 9. One of those big Catholic families. Grew up in Alabama, and that we were homeschooled too, so we were way off the normal beaten path. That's a little bit of the early background.
Yeah, it's definitely not what the typical person would experience. I would say majority of people come from small families, public schooling, not involved in the church whatsoever, at least in today's society.
Yeah, absolutely.
So when we talk about going to one of the service academies, highly competitive, at what point growing up did you decide that was something that you wanted to do and direct your efforts towards?
Yeah, so I was pretty young when I figured that out. No one in my family had ever been to a service academy before. I had a grandfather who served in the Army. He went over in 1946 to Europe, part of like occupation force. So he was just slightly too young and missed most of World War II, and then enlisted as soon as he was able. So there wasn't a whole lot of military in our extended family or our ancestry. I was probably 8 or 10 years old, and we had this book laying around. I still have it actually, but it was called The Magnificent Mariner. It was a book about John Paul Jones, and I read that. And the very last chapter talked a little bit about them establishing an officer school on the banks of the Severn River for training future officers. And it was a kid's book, but I fell in love with it. I wanted to be John Paul Jones. I wanted to go to the Naval Academy, and I have a very decisive personality when I make a decision. So I said, that's where I'm going. I'm going there no matter what. And then designed everything, as a homeschooler. It had to get involved in all kinds of activities that were a little more difficult to get to and be a part of in order to try to develop the right resume so that my application would even be looked at. Had a co-op where, one of the guidance counselors told, oh, we don't send kids to the service academy. There's no way. I was probably a sophomore in high school. And, she said, there's no way, there's no chance, here's some other schools you might have a shot at. Don't even bother. So I was like, well, shoot, I'm absolutely going now. You don't tell me where I can't go.
Yeah, it's crazy for a guidance counselor to say that, usually
Yeah.
they're.
Was it, this story sounds exact, like pretty much parallel to, was it, I can't remember if it was Mark's or not, but he grew up listening to pirate stories, and then his school told him that he didn't have the right credentials and that he wasn't gonna make it, or he would never get accepted into the school he was trying to get into. I'll have to look it up. In one of our past interviews, somebody had mentioned pretty much the same story. So just wanting a life of exploration on the sea and sightseeing and whatnot, and then his school told him that no, like they don't accept people from the small tiny school of ours, so you might as well pick a new career. Yeah,
we must have a certain type.
Yeah, a certain archetype. When you said trying to get in these extracurricular activities, was difficult. Were any of those activities leadership related? Because I just did ROTC, but I seem to remember there being some sort of interest even in applying to that and applying for a scholarship to get accepted into ROTC, which the bar is a heck of a lot lower, that there was some interest in leadership potential. Is there anything that you did to support that and strengthen your application in high school?
Yeah, so we started a homeschool baseball team, and we would have to travel sometimes pretty far away to find teams to play. And so as we got pretty competitive, teams started wanting to play us more. So that was one area. I ended up being the captain of the high school baseball team. The co-op that we were part of, homeschool co-op, we also had a lot of activities that were put on plays and did things like that. We had a student government association. So I ran for one of the offices there. But again, it's a burden on the parents, right? Because then they have to travel all over the planet, and being one of 11 kids at the time, not 11, but maybe 7 or 8 at the time. But, it's a burden on the family. But, I did enough to build the package to be competitive. I got, nominations from one of the senators and one of the congressmen, but I did not get in the first time around. So my backup school was Ole Miss, and I was able to pick up a 4-year ROTC scholarship to Ole Miss. So I did Ole Miss for a year. And then because people don't get to tell me what I can't do, I reapplied to the Naval Academy and got in the second time around. So that's how I ended up there, and then dropped a 4-year scholarship at, the SEC party school, and then had to start over in order to do the academy. But that's the price you pay to be able to take your own destiny in your own hands.
Absolutely. Yeah. So I love the story of being able to put an entire baseball team together. I mean, that's exactly the kind of leadership that I think that we need, in American society today, where everybody's kind of seems to be looking for permission to do stuff, and there's still the capacity to do things like that, and build community, and have a good time in the process. So it's really cool that that's something that you did on the road to fulfilling your dream of getting into the Naval Academy. So that's a funny story. That's like, you got into Ole Miss, you already had a year under your belt. You would have ended up with the same commission, right? Getting paid the same at the end of those 4 years at Ole Miss, with potentially a little bit less effort. Was there any time when you were at the Naval Academy, and it was a particularly challenging class or a period of time, that you were like, maybe I should have just stayed at Ole Miss? Because I know that's more my personality. Like, I was very happy to have done ROTC, for that reason, because of it's just so challenging. Is that something that ever crossed your mind, or were you just 100%, all full steam ahead the entire time that you were in school?
Yeah, I never regretted it once, not once. Now the Naval Academy is, all the service academies, they're often a great place to be from and a terrible place to be at. So it certainly is, it's painful at times, but I never once sat there and thought, man, I wish I was back at Ole Miss. No, because it's what I wanted to do, and achieving goals, and setting goals for myself and then reaching them is really important to me. And I never had it in me to look back at a previous goal, and wish I had not tried to go for it. That's not really part of how I was raised. And I would say, back to the baseball thing, I wish I was more of a driving force behind that, but it really was my father that was the driving force behind that. And he's a great leadership example, an executive right now with a major defense contractor. So he climbed the ranks with his own talent and capability. So I had a pretty awesome person to learn from, as I developed a lot of leadership skills, in my own right, usually the hard way. But I had a good example before me anyway.
Awesome. So transitioning out of service academy and going into your career in the Navy, what are some, you mentioned setting goals, and then, a big part of, just your personality in your life is you have a goal, and then you're just really driven to achieve that goal. After commissioning, what was one of those career goals that you had early on as a naval officer, and did you learn any leadership lessons along the way towards achieving whatever that goal might have been?
Yeah, so I was a surface warfare officer, so assigned to a destroyer. And one of the things you need to do is you need to be qualified in a bunch of different watch stations, and then ultimately get qualified officer of the deck underway. You're the captain's representative on the bridge, driving the ship. The captain physically, humanly cannot be up there 24/7 keeping the ship safe. He's a human. He has to sleep. He has to eat. He has reports to do. Planning for things. So he has a watch that covers that 24/7. And often the captain is up on the bridge. The good ones are up there a lot. So that was one of the main watch stations to get qualified in, and the other is earning your SWO pin. Once you're qualified, all the shipboard watch stations that you're supposed to be as an officer, you can continue on and learn all of the knowledge, the information that's required of surface warfare officers across a much broader spectrum. It deals a lot more with war fighting and communications, and a lot of interesting stuff. And so it's a lot of study, and it's a lot of learning from those around you, particularly the senior enlisted who've been doing the job for a lot longer than most baby junior officers have been doing the job. So my goal was to be the first to qualify in my year group, all the new ensigns that showed up, and then to help other people along the way. So I think that I think I was if I wasn't the first, I think I was the first one by a couple months to get qualified in all the watch stations. And there were some previous year group guys that we ended up jumping because they weren't quite ready. They failed the qualification board or whatever. And, a couple of us from the younger group we were ready. We were confident on the bridge. We were confident that we could drive the ship the way the captain wanted. So, so achieving that goal was something important to me. But it was more about trying to be the absolute best that I could be in any given job, and never shirk away from taking on tougher roles and tougher duties and trying to do things quicker.
And did that, I got to assume that just continued after that.
Yeah, it's probably a personality thing. I can't stand being second place. It's a bad story, but just playing video games with one of my brothers-in-law as a young 20-year-old, he kept crushing me. We were visiting. I was newly married, and he's 16. He's great, fantastic guy. I love him to death. I've got great family on both sides. But he was crushing me, and he's like, I got to go to school. He'd come back and we'd play, and he'd crush me again. It might have been FIFA 2007 or some, I don't even remember what. But, I was like, I'm not going to let this happen again. And I'm on vacation, so it doesn't matter. So I stayed up all night practicing, playing the hardest levels. And, just because I cannot stand losing. And then, I practiced all day when he went to school. He came home. I was like, all right, I'm ready. Let's do this. And he crushed me. And, it's that kind of thing. Like, I can't let things go. I gotta, so that it's a personality thing, probably.
Yeah. But I'm hearing it right now, and it sounds like you've always been a person that has been extremely motivated and determined and strive for success. It sounds like your dad was a very good example of orchestrating that way for you to, have involvement in community, even though you were homeschooled and not part of the public necessarily. But at the same time, like, you were the captain of that. And if you weren't born with those leadership abilities naturally inherent in you, and you were just, a couch potato or whatever, you wouldn't have been able to be a good captain of that baseball team or whatever. It would have just been something that your dad was pushing you into. So the fact that you were able to successfully do it, and then take that example that your dad was setting for you and take it and run with it and go continuously throughout the career, or throughout your life and your career, and not look back, and then have this pride in winning, but this can't stand losing, and your success story of how you progressed, it is very impressive. It's very impressive that a homeschool kid could get into the Naval Academy and progress, and then be the first in their peer groups from how you describe a bit. And you're even jumping ahead of a year group ahead of you, and you're just driven for success. And that's, I don't know, sounds like it's a good story. It's a good story.
Yeah, I appreciate that. It also, and to that point, Ronnie, that you make, I think it helped that I was coach's kid, because I was very sensitive to that. And I think, my dad said, because of that, you have to be better than everybody else. You have to try harder than everyone else. You have to run faster. Yeah. Right. When I say, all right, we're doing foul poles, instead of laps, we ran foul pole to foul pole. Right. And, I'd be the first on the line. I would try to be the first to get there, even though we're tired, we're beat. We just had I remember one time we were down, not playing well, making mental errors. And, lost pretty badly in a game that to a team where we probably should have beaten them. And right. I remember, shoot, and I'd even been a doubleheader. It was miserable. And at the end, the coach was like, all right, foul poles. Like, we're not done with this. You guys want to not try? You want to be down? You want to not leave it all on the field?
Yeah.
We're going to run foul poles after playing, 5 hours of baseball.
Right.
And you'll learn the hard way. And so, being the first on the line, staying motivated, cheering everybody else on, part of that was being coach's kid, right? To make sure, if I'm going to be the captain, I have to set that example, or people are going to think it's some kind of entitlement nonsense. And
right.
And it certainly wasn't, because I tried to do everything I could to truly lead, and be the one to take the toughest job first. But
right.
So I was glad to have that development in high school before I joined the military.
From the sounds of it, you, without having family members that were from the military or an ancestry from the military, you grew up with a senior NCO. You learned before you even became an officer, what a lot of new officers or lieutenants find out the hard way, of I have to listen and take advantage of this experience and this example that's being set in front of me, and not act like a know-it-all, and take everything in as wisdom and knowledge and experience, and try to use them all as tools to the best of my ability based off from the example that's been set in front of me. So I think that's probably why your story is so successful, because you did have that strong presence that required you or requested of you to get involved, and start taking part and doing something more and something bigger, that is, something more that's just yourself, if that makes sense. And sounds, you had that, platoon sergeant of a dad, if you will, or at least that's how I would say it, in the Army. But
no, that's a pretty good description. And there wasn't a lot of requesting. There's demanded that, the level of effort, that caring about
right,
doing better and trying hard.
Right.
So the big takeaway that I'm getting from this is you mentioned that it's a personality thing, and it's like maybe this personality thing. I mean, some of it had to do with your father. Some of it has to do with whatever's innate to you as a human being. But that's a character strength, like this desire to be number one. And some people, I think, today look at that, and they don't see the value in that, because if you get second place, that's hard, in spite of your best efforts. But what's the logical result of you constantly having that disposition where you're wanting to be number one? Is the result is you achieve excellence. And in terms of leadership, that excellence can then motivate people that don't have that same personality. So like, I know that I'm not one of those people with that personality, where I want to be number one at everything. But I can tell you, you personally, you being this driven motivated me in the COVID vaccine mandate context to be more active and more aggressive and speak out more, because I saw what you were doing, and what I ended up doing was like a drop in the bucket, if anything, compared to the substantial impacts that I believe that you were able to have. But that character strength that you have was able to inspire me, for one. And I know there's no way that I'm alone in that. And I got to imagine every single position that you held in the Navy, you were that guy that was contributing that character strength. And I think that's one of the key character strengths that makes a really good leader, that I can recognize as something that like that I don't have, and I can kind of fake it. But for the people that have it, it's just they're so critical to having a team, because it's like you're automatically, putting forth the effort that leads to excellence, and then everybody else around you can't help but get inspired. Do you have any thoughts on that? Does that resonate at all?
I do have some thoughts on that, and I'm glad that you kicked it to me, because I really want your viewers and listeners to understand something about that particular character, called a strength for me. But all character strengths, oftentimes, a person's greatest character strength is also their greatest character weakness. So let's go back to that video game story I shared with you. What did I do when I lost after spending 24 hours training? Right, it's a video game. It's silly.
It ate you up.
Yeah, well, yeah. I threw the
took up all your
controller.
time. Yeah, made you
I
act
threw
a
the
fool,
controller.
maybe.
I
Right.
maybe said something I shouldn't have,
Right.
and like terrified my poor 16-year-old brother-in-law.
Right.
And they're like, "Hey, I have to go back and apologize later. Hey, man, I'm really sorry. Right? I overreacted. This is just a silly game. That kind of stuff. Oh, bro, no, it's cool. Hug it out." So there is, and I'm a young 20-year-old, and I'm still learning to hone the character strengths, right? To take that middle path where, yes, I don't accept second place, but I also am resigned. And in my case, the way I see it, resigned to God's will. Hey, I needed the lesson of losing in this particular case, right? And oftentimes, even recently, being fired from my job, losing in other ways, I have developed over time, and I'm not perfect at it, but more being willing to say, hey, I'm not in control of everything, and I can't always be number one, and I'm often not, actually very often not. And so that greatest character weakness, what character strength, will be your greatest character weakness if you let it. And so that character development is crucial, and I would offer to everybody listening in and watching to try to become the best version of yourself, honing your particular skill sets. I was lucky to have good parents that were developing us, focusing on character first, and it's helped me become a better husband and father, or try to be. But it's taken me a long time to learn that lesson, and I still have to work on it.
Yeah, it's something I wanted to say when Grant was just bringing up that last thing is it really depends on what you do with your self-perceived excellency as well. Are you a person that's arrogant and thinks that you're the best, or are you looking at it as a tool to help others, or as a way for you to gain knowledge to give to others, like it or trying to set an example for others? It really depends. Are you just trying to be the best for yourself? Are you trying to be the best for yourself and everybody else that you love or are involved with? And I think that really makes a big difference, because that's where the line is drawn between somebody that's cocky and arrogant or self-righteous, I guess, and between somebody that just wants to better themselves and be the best person that they can be. And I think that we do experience that. We're all arrogant and cocky, or just not matured yet to balance our perception of ourselves yet, and how we interact with with the environment around us, or the people around us. And yeah, you definitely have to take those lessons that are happening along the way and use it to mold yourself into a better version, right? Because otherwise you would just be now a 40-year-old person getting pissed off, throwing the controller across the room, and that looks even worse than a 20-year-old, because now it's like, well, so yeah, I agree with you, Rob. You definitely have to hone in the skill and use it, and can't just keep the same mentality or perception throughout your entire life.
Yeah, I love that point you made too. And there is no stagnation in human nature. Like, you're either progressing or or you're degressing, you're
Right.
regressing, right? You either are improving something or you're getting worse at it. Like every virtue out there, you're either practicing it and strengthening it, or you're practicing the opposite of that virtue, which is a vice. So, and you're going to be strengthening that. And we saw that a lot, Grant, I especially, actually, both of you, you saw that, with your military experiences recently, where people did not practice the virtue of personal courage.
Yeah.
What's the opposite of that particular virtue? Well, it's cowardice.
Right. Absolutely.
So we saw a lot of that.
I that's so great, sir. That ties into, because I brought up character strengths, and the reason I like that term is because it falls under Army Master Resiliency Training. And they even specifically in the training, it's just like you said, every strength, what they call it in Master Resiliency Training is a shadow side. Every strength has a shadow side. And I think you hit the nail on the head with tying that to virtue and vice, where leveraging your character strengths and demonstrating the best version of those, while developing the maturity to mitigate the vicious side of those strengths, that shadow side of those strengths. Because we all have different strengths and weaknesses. And I think there's a tendency to, like, especially with the, I don't want to get too far down the rabbit hole on critical race theory and microaggressions and all that, but I think it's very closely related, where there's not a desire to pursue virtue and looking at things, not appreciating people's inherent differences and strengths and weaknesses, not appreciating that people are not equal. It's because these inequalities where some people are better at certain things than others, focusing on those strengths and becoming virtuous in your areas of strengths while minimizing that shadow side, that is how an effective organization runs. It's how an effective society runs, because you can't really get so much out of your weaknesses. I mean, they're innate, but those strengths, that's how you can really help other people, is by honing those strengths and drawing and focusing on the virtue of those strengths, and then relying on others to shore the gap in the places where you're innately weak. So I think that there's, like, this is exactly the kind of thing that's it's difficult to articulate.
It's missing in society. Because I would also say that you have to factor in the aligning of morals, right? Because we talk about character traits and then virtues, and then which I would say are opposite, or not opposite, but different than morals. So I'd say throwing in your alignment of morals into there and adding all three in, then you have a well-structured, balanced person or society, or whatever. But it seems like in today's time, or the current modern era that we're in, all of those things are missing. People don't have strong positive character traits, don't have strong morals, and don't even have any virtues to follow anyways. So or if they do, they're the wrong ones, or the wrong mentalities, or almost like a programming of society to be immoral and corrupt and self-centered.
Yeah, and worse than that, it appears to want to absolve everyone of those faults, failures, and dare I say, sins, by blaming everyone else. Right? The programs that you mentioned, Grant, and the theories behind those programs. And I can't speak for everyone else. I can only speak for myself. But if I were to latch on to those particular programs and theories and make those, internalize those, and make those part of of everything I believed in, I feel for me that would be an enabler of people who don't want to take personal responsibility for where they are at right now in this moment in life. Those programs want to point to everything else and everyone else, and systemic problems that there are certainly systemic problems, but the only thing that you can do right now is pick up your rucksack and move it down the field. I mean,
Right. Yeah.
that's
Yeah.
about where I'm at, and I don't think that those programs are helping a lot of people with personal responsibility and actually helping them develop the character they need to take their rucksacks down the field.
Man,
I think this
I
goes.
love that analogy. I've never, I mean, maybe I've heard it. I've definitely said it in the physical sense, out on field training exercises or long rucks where somebody just breaks down and gives up, and we're far away from everything. It's like, dude, nobody's coming to save you. Pick up your ruck and move. So the way that you just said that was, yeah, definitely profound to me. It's like, dude, are you gonna sit here on the side of the road, whining and complaining and hoping that a vehicle comes and picks you up, even though we're out in the middle of nowhere or whatever, or that something comes and saves you, or are you gonna figure out a way to push through it? So that was very profound. I liked it.
That's for my Army brethren.
Yeah. Or wait until all of Western civilization is dismantled, before you can move forward. It's like it's ridiculous when, everybody has within them the capacity to overcome some stuff. I mean, we don't know if we're going to be how successful we're going to be, but we know that we can try. And the thing about trying is that it's very difficult. Not everybody has the personality where they're, high in conscientiousness, personality trait. Not everybody has that. And so for those folks, it's hard enough to put the effort in. And then if you have just the faintest excuse to not put the effort in because, well, you have this justification that, if you fail, it's not your fault. And effort on your part is useless anyway. There's no way that you can ever succeed because of immutable characteristics that aren't going to change. I can't think of anything that any single thing that would be more toxic to the functioning of an organization or just the performance of an individual, because everything requires effort. And where are you going to draw the motivation to exert that effort if you've internalized an ideology that says that it's all pointless and that at the end of the day you are a victim and that you always will be a victim of oppression?
And everything is everyone else's fault that you can't overcome. That's a great point.
So what this is gonna be a hard question, sir. We already covered that, being number one, striving towards excellence as a character strength, and the shadow side of that, and how a part of maturing, like as a human being and as a leader, was gaining control of that shadow side, in order to mitigate those negative effects while still being able to harness the strength. Is there any other character strength or any other attribute that you've noticed in your career that's kind of dual-edged like that, like a propensity that you have that served you very well, but has had downsides that have been difficult to overcome? I know it's kind of a hard question. I don't know that I'd be able to answer it, but I am curious if anything comes to mind.
Well, if you were to ask me about faults and failures, I think I wouldn't have to dig as deep. But I am I think I'm a pretty deep introvert by nature. I mean, you probably have done some of the Myers-Briggs sort of testing to get your own personality type and figure out where you are. I'm one of those as a pretty deep introvert. I have to go talk to people. Well, I need to recharge after that. Right. It's hard sometimes and not something I particularly enjoy doing. Even sometimes with people I really like and like being around, it can sometimes be a chore. So in a position of leadership, and even my most recent position, leading a unit of 650 people, it's all about people. It's taking care of people. It's guiding people. It's developing people. It's talking to people. And so having to break out of the comfort zone, where I naturally don't like to be necessarily, it's sometimes a bit of a chore. So there's one character issue there. I think it boils down to, am I going to be selfish or I'm going to be selfless with my time, attention and energy. And the same thing happens, with my own family in my own household. I love to research and write and read and do that kind of stuff. And am I going to, zone out, put headphones in and, not pay attention to everything boiling up around me, because I need to exclude myself from that, right? I have deep character flaws there that I, constantly need to work on and overcome.
Damn, I
Yeah,
feel
and
like
I wouldn't say that's a flaw. I would say that what I take away from that is just how important it is to know yourself. It's just your personality, right? If you are extroverted or you're introverted, if you know where you're at, it's like you said, based on your personality, if there's a certain amount that you can do, you can stretch a little bit by motivating yourself. I picked up on some power statements there where it's like, am I going to be selfish or am I going to be selfless? Like little things like that you can tell yourself to give yourself that energy to push into an area where you're uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, knowing that that's not something that comes naturally to you and that you do have to recharge. Because I think there's this idea that, you don't have to work with your strengths and limitations or your strengths and your weaknesses. What you have an affinity for and what you don't. And when people try and say, oh, a leader's got to be extroverted all the time, it's like, well, you're not. And so if you try and internalize that and emulate, say, somebody that gets energy from being around people, which is a different personality type, right? You're not going to be nearly as successful. It's just,
It's a great point.
Everybody's different, and the fact that you can recognize that and that you have that self-awareness, I think, is one of the key things that makes people able to discover their own leadership styles and what works well for them. Because if you don't have that self-awareness, like stuff like that's going to sneak up on you, and you're going to look at people that you admire and you're going to want to emulate what they do. But a tricky thing with there's something called Rothbard's law, which is things that you aren't necessarily good at or that you aren't the best at. When you see those attributes in other people, you value them very highly because to you it seems like very expensive and very difficult, whereas to them it's like very, very easy. And so some people choose professions based on this, where they look at a profession, they like really admire a certain profession that doesn't back up to their own intrinsic predilections and personality type, and then they have a miserable time. And I think it just comes down to self-awareness, where if you're able to recognize what your strengths and weaknesses are, you can adjust, you can work with your God-given talents, your biology, however you want to frame it, instead of working against it.
It's funny too that it's not like we're discovering these things for the first time ever. I think it was several hundred years ago. Didn't somebody say, "To thine own self be true"?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, it's these are. It's like we've lost so much. It's like this stuff that we say it, we discuss it seems very, very obvious.
I've been saying we're going through a renaissance, just like a modern day of renaissance where people are figuring out stuff that that we've known for a long time and forgotten or have lost touch with, or getting back involved with or something. So the fact that you just bring up, philosophy and a couple hundred years ago and this renaissance of thinking, because I believe that in a way we're experiencing it. So it definitely caught my attention. I didn't mean to interrupt you, Grant.
No, I have a question on that. Have either of you read the book Canticle for Leibowitz?
No.
That's one of my favorites. Now I'm kind of a science fiction nerd a little bit sometimes. It's a post-apocalyptic type book written by I think the guy's last name was Miller. He was involved in World War II the bombing of the Abbey of Monte Cassino, and I think at the time it's like the oldest one in the world. So I guess at the time it was probably 15 or 1600 years old. Like history, if that thing gets lost, like it's not recoverable.
Mhm.
I mean, it's a blow to culture and civilization. And he was I guess a tail gunner and a bomber that like took the thing down, turned it to rubble. And so writing the Canticle for Leibowitz was part of his working through some of that. And so I highly recommend that book to your audience, as a great way to see what could happen when we lose the culture, when we lose what appears like we're apparently losing right now. We're losing Western civilization. We're forgetting all of these lessons, the things about morals and values and the things that made our country what it is, the things that the founding fathers took for granted. Like half of them didn't even want to include the Bill of Rights in the Constitution. If you go back and look at history, they did not even want to include it because they just assumed everyone knew this and that it was silly to include that stuff. So they thought it was just be a part of the granted. Everybody's got their God-given rights. And now people don't even know what we're talking about when we say natural law or
what's that? What are God-given rights? What are the rules written by man? It's crazy.
So Canticle for Leibowitz would be a good read for those who want to dig in a fun way back into some of that sort of philosophy.
Yeah, I got it pulled up. I'll definitely check it out. So I don't want to go too far down the COVID vaccine rabbit hole because I know you speak about that a lot. But I am curious because I haven't heard the story from your perspective. And I'm just kind of curious, what kind of stuff was going through your mind? You mentioned the personal courage thing. I know that you're very, we've established that you're very competitive, and you were kind of at a high point in your career. Rodney and I have discussed this. It's like it was a very difficult time for everyone. But I'd be curious to hear your thoughts of kind of what was going through your mind when you were kind of planning out your moves and deciding what the best way ahead forward was in terms of your own moral convictions, leadership, your career up to that point, how it related to the Navy, all that kind of stuff.
And I'm assuming up until this point you were a big fan of the Navy. Maybe, I mean, it sounds like it. I mean, I was salty in the Army for like 9 years before I got out. But it sounds like, you were driven the whole time, had a very promising career and whatnot. I'm sure you might have had some, internal disputes or stuff that you hated or changes that you could see. But I'm assuming after that 2020 moment, and you're like, wow. Did you experience that at all?
Yeah, so it didn't take me long to kind of see through things a little bit. Part of that is we talked a little bit about nature and nurture and personality types and characteristics, but I'll say something passed down from my grandfather, the one I mentioned before, who was part of the occupation force following World War II. He deeply struggled with being told what to do by a government. I mean, I think he would have been an incredible member of the Sons of Liberty back in the day. He refused to wear a seatbelt just because the government told him he had to. That kind of thing. Like, I deeply love the man, and but he had an independent streak a mile wide, and so I think I have get a little bit of that from him, and then look around and and say, hey, government's encroaching, upon every possible avenue of life. Everything is regimented, rigidly controlled and regulated. I'd done a lot of reading on Joel Salatin's a great example. The way he is healing the land with the way he farms, not the government's way, which is destroying the earth. Ironically, that's the thing that they believe is of the highest value, apparently. Right. So, there's a lot of that going on in my own background that, as we get into, the COVID virus itself, and then all the mitigations from it, things seemed weird.
Yeah.
Some of those mitigation protocols felt like government imposed one size fits all control measures rather than individualized health assessments, permitted by lower level folks who have to make judgments between mission requirements and keeping people healthy and safe. And so it was a complete overriding of what it didn't feel right. Didn't seem right.
Commander's discretion completely went out the window.
Very, very quickly. Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. And so stuff did not, nothing even made sense on top of that. Like, you're making this one size fits all for everybody, but then the one size fits all that you're applying to everybody can't even pass the common sense test. And,
like walking into the restaurant with your mask on and then sit down as long, like shoulder to shoulder people and take it off. Like, that doesn't make any sense.
Right.
So a lot of that kind of stuff. And so then when the vaccine came out, now I'm very conscientious to make sure that I follow all lawful orders, right, and that I'm honest, like to the point when the very first guidance in the Navy, and I'm going to be writing about this, the very first guidance from the Navy came out talking about going to indoor religious services was prohibited. This is early in 2020.
Yep.
It was prohibited to go to indoor religious services. I was required to sign sign the order, acknowledging the order. And at the top of what they gave me to sign, it said, I will abide by the following. And it lists everything. Don't go to the beach. Don't go to the gym. Don't go to the bar. Don't do indoor religious services. So I, in good conscience, because I'm not going to lie either, in good conscience, I cannot sign this. So I asked for the editable PDF version. I wrote at the top, I acknowledge
the
following, and then I sign that, right? Because I personal conviction that if I'm telling you I'm not going to follow this order, I'm not going to tell you I'm going to follow the order. So that kind of stuff was happening.
I put the same thing on a counseling statement. I actually just I posted it up on Twitter after I shared my religious exemption. But when we received the counseling statement of, you must get vaccinated within whatever, and then these are the punishments if you don't, I wrote in my own blurb, I am not, and then I signed my blurb instead of like the counseling blurb. So that way is like known very well that, I'm signing this right here. I am not agreeing to this. And my signature is declaring that I am refusing this. If anything, like, I'm acknowledging that I have read it, but I am refusing to abide by it. If that makes sense.
It does. And something that everybody needs to understand. If you're not in the military, you sometimes develop this thing like, oh, well, they have to follow the orders. It's required. Like the law says and all that. No, hang on. the law says you need to follow all the lawful
orders. Yeah.
And what can make an order unlawful? Well, it's two main things in the manual for court martial. And well, it doesn't explicitly say this in the UCMJ, but in the manual for court martial that goes into the detail of each article of the UCMJ and what it means and how it's interpreted, and how courts have set precedents for it. There are two main things. The order cannot violate the statutory rights. That means the rights under the current laws of the person receiving the order. And it cannot violate the constitutional rights of the person receiving the order. If it does either of those two things, the order loses the assumption that it is lawful. So orders, when you give orders as an officer or an senior enlisted person, or you receive orders from someone, the order has what's called an inference of lawfulness. It's basically an assumption that the order is lawful. That you not only does an order become unlawful if it violates those two things, the order loses the inference of lawfulness, loses the assumption that it is lawful. And so you have an obligation as a military member
to refuse,
to disobey that order, to the best of your ability in the situation that you're in. And I'll even say this, because there's a lot of stuff kicking around over the last several years about the Vindman brothers, if you know who they are. And I actually read Alexander Vindman's book because I was interested. And he actually says in there, in his book, every military member knows, and this is a slight paraphrase, so because I don't want to get it, I'm probably not going to get it exactly perfect, right? But he says every service member knows that disobeying an unlawful order is also required. There's a line in there that he puts about.
No, it is. Yeah.
This is from essentially the far left. I don't want to characterize him unfairly, but from a military member, he's a Purple Heart winner. He's a brother in arms. He served with us, and he says the exact same thing about lawful and unlawful orders. This is not something that we all disagree over. This is 100%. Every side agrees. You disobey unlawful orders.
Right. So you're agreeing with, I got a little bit confused when you said that it's from the far left or whatever. So you're agreeing with that statement that you're saying that he made.
100%. Yeah. Alexander Vindman and I agree that you should disobey unlawful orders.
Right. Yeah. I thought it was common knowledge. I don't necessarily know if maybe it could be a Bill of Rights situation and where it needs to be written down because you think that it's common knowledge.
I think most people understand that, but the trick that we run into is everybody just assumes that there's no way that anybody would give an unlawful order, and
it's so common that
if they do, that you don't have the cognitive capacity to be able to determine that,
right?
Especially if you're some junior enlisted soldier, right? So I think that's what we run into. And I've had this argument. I think probably each of us had this argument at least once, where somebody goes, "Why aren't you following this order?" It's like, well, it's an unlawful order.
No, it's not.
And they say, no, it's not. It's like,
you agreed to take you agreed to get vaccinated.
But I really like what you said about the inference of it being a lawful order goes away if it violates statutory rights or constitutional rights of the individual. Because all these orders pretend, especially this one where they say, "Oh, you can't do indoor religious gatherings or indoor religious services." That's ludicrous. That's a clear violation of the First Amendment of the Constitution. Not even close.
100%.
And so the inference has got to be that that's an unlawful order. And anybody who disagrees, it's like, well, prove it to me. It's your obligation now to prove this is not directly infringing upon service members' First Amendment rights. And we saw that attorney for the DOJ recently say in front of a judge, "Oh, well, they don't have those constitutional rights and religious freedom and, First Amendment rights, like if they want to exercise those rights, they have to sue and win. It's like, what? He said that. And that's how these folks are operating now. They're
Yeah,
operating
I was
with
listening to that. It's crazy.
Yeah.
There has
Yeah.
been congressional hearings, I guess, of how the Supreme Court is or is not going to get involved with with the Constitution versus the UCMJ, and how the UCMJ how do I want to word it? How they follow rules that are entirely of their own, that they're not going to get involved with or whatever. I'd have to maybe when I'm editing this, I'll put them in the links or something so people can read them. But I mean, it's complete nonsense to assume that once you sign a piece of paper, you give up your God-given rights. I mean, I don't know. It sounds like a deal with the devil to me in that case. It sounds like you're signing away your soul if you're giving away your God-given rights. And if one of those things that is going to be required of you to be taken away is your belief in God, then it sure as hell sounds like you're making a deal with the devil. So
the important point, I think, for your listeners and viewers to understand, though, the important point that I wanted to make is that the American people often make that assumption. Hey, when you sign up, you give up your rights. Well, that's 100% not the case.
Right. Mm-hmm.
What the only thing required is that there are some curbing of your of a certain number of your rights for the sole purpose of mission execution and good order and discipline, right? And insofar as those things are not impacted, you have 100% of your rights. So there is some gray area, there is some wiggle room there where the government can say, hey, we do have to do this for good order and discipline, or we do have to do this for mission readiness, whatever this is.
Which they tried using both excuses for this.
Right. And then service members also, hey, well, this is under my, First Amendment rights, or this is under, whatever it is that they're, this particular law, statutory right. And so we have some of that give and take, but in that situation, and I think Grant alluded to this, when you have that conflict, it is the burden of the government. The government has the burden of proof to prove that they're not infringing on that right. And they have to do that assessment individually, person by person, right by right, case by case. And that, of course, we talk about this one size fits all government policy. It did not happen that way, which is, of course, a violation of constitutional rights and statutory rights under the law.
And as a commander, I'm assuming that you deal a lot with UCMJ, non-judicial punishment, speaking with JAG or TDS or whatever the Navy calls it or whatever, right? Where you speak with you have a legal liaison, which you call, and all of these things throughout a multitude of cases with soldiers and punishments and whatever, right? These things become known to you while you speak with JAG or with TDS or with legal. So it's not like you're just spitting stuff out, right? Or like you're some guy that is like some wannabe lawyer, right? Like stuff that you're coming up with is stuff that you have been fed at some point in time by division legal or Navy legal or whatever, your fleet legal or whatever it is. I'm assuming.
Yeah. Well, no, you're absolutely right. Now, most of us in this situation have had to go get really smart on the law,
right?
Post all of this. But you're absolutely right that I had a relationship with my JAG.
Right.
We dealt with cases, we dealt with situations, we dealt with paperwork, we dealt with complaints filed by service members. And it was odd, funny, ironic. I'm not sure exactly the right word, but when the the force of Navy legal, when they circled the wagons around this particular policy from the administration, and they decided that, this is the policy, this is what we're going to do. They gave the shrug that, hey, it's policy, hey, it's a lawful order, and they were not doing the individualized assessments. They were not listening to any of the details we had. It was funny, odd, ironic, whatever the word is, to have the relationship I built with the JAG,
Right. Yeah.
to have that turned on me was very, I mean, funny in hindsight, that it all happened. We had a great relationship, worked through all kinds of stuff, and then all of a sudden, you start hearing crickets, like, oh, I mean, this guy's not calling me anymore.
Right.
Yeah.
So it's funny.
That was one of the most crushing things to me about this whole thing. I think that was emotionally, that was the hardest thing, where, we had these close relationships and these people that we work with and trust over so long. And this issue comes up, and then a switch gets flipped, and all of a sudden you find out what those relationships are really worth. As a lot of people just, it's like, don't you know me?
Wolves in
Haven't we
sheep's
been
clothing.
working together for years?
Mhm.
That was really hard. I think that was, I don't know if it hit everybody else the same way, but for me, that was the hardest. Because you have those relationships, like you said, and then it's like, what like, it's almost funny. It wouldn't be funny. It would be funny if it wasn't so tragic.
I went through a freaking existential crisis because of it. Like my whole world flipped upside down. My view on the world, and I thought I was like awake before. No, man. Like my world is never going to be like it was before the cowards came out to play, I guess, if you will. And I hate to say that about people that I once had like real respect for, or that I thought had my back the same way that I had theirs and my soldiers back. You know what I mean? So when you realize that you are your own advocate and nobody other than you is looking out for you, it seems like it'd be something like common sense. But once you have that aha moment of like, damn, I am alone, it's up until you find other people, that, free to not be alone. But when it comes down to the people that you thought were going to protect you, or, that you worked so hard for, sacrificed for, looked up to, so on and so forth, for that to all go away, you're just like, wow, dude. And because what? Because they're afraid of pissing off the boss. They're afraid of losing their livelihood. I had a livelihood too. I got a wife, 2 kids, and 2 mortgages. It's not like I decided to dispute the vaccine for nothing. I had a lot of shit on the line. So it is a real aha moment, when the people that you thought were there just no longer are there for you because they're scared themselves and they chose to take another way. If that makes sense.
Yeah, well, it does make sense. And a lot of people went through those crises. I was talking to an 06 the other day, who's still fighting this. One of the few, and I feel like I've talked to most of them at this point, or I know, most of them, but he was talking about how, it's just depression, like deep struggles for him. And I'll share, for me, I had kind of the opposite effect. And, maybe I was just made for a time like this, but when this thing went down, I have never had so much fun in my life. You guys probably think I am absolutely crazy, but, I was losing, these relationships that I had built or whatever, like the JAG now only emails me or talks to me to, tell me I've got to sign this new form because I'm, in trouble or whatever. Right. Like everybody turned on me. I'm like, oh, that's awesome. I don't have to deal with this person anymore. My deep introvert came out, and I was just like relieved. Great. I don't have to keep building this relationship anymore. My rebellious streak came out that I inherited from my grandfather. I'm like, awesome. I can, stand up for this good and true thing against people who are violating it. Right. And be on the right side. of history on this one, so that felt great. And then getting to meet people, getting to help people who were struggling. I finally felt like I was, um, you know, we do all kinds of stuff in the service of our country, right? We go on these long deployments. You guys have probably been in the sandbox overseas, or, if you haven't been in some mess over there, then you certainly know people who have. Um, we do all these things for our country in defense of the Constitution, mostly against the foreign threats that we swear to support and defend the Constitution against. But for the first time in my life with this COVID fight, I felt like I was personally doing something that defended the Constitution in a way that I had never done before. And it was so fulfilling. I'm telling you, I never had so much fun in my life as a service member than fighting this fight.
I agree. I agree with that. Because whatever I went through, obviously it was a phase that I quickly went out of. And then I guess really what it was for me was, I thought everybody else was seeing through it too. Maybe that's what did it more for me, is I thought like everybody was seeing it for what it was, and there's no way that, like, yeah, right, dude, there's no way people are gonna like fall for this crap. And then like literally the whole world fell for the crap. Like 70% of the world. I don't know what the stats are. I haven't looked, but a lot, like probably at least 1/3% of the population, right? And probably a lot more than that.
Well, they help the people put their blinders on when they dangle the carrots, right? And so then people don't want to be faced with their own compromising decisions,
right?
And I think that you're right. Most people would have seen through it or did see through it, but they were handed blinders and they were handed a carrot. Your job, your ability to see grandma in the nursing home, your all this stuff, right? And so for me, it was super freeing to finally be like, God, whatever the consequences are, I'm with you. Yeah. And I'm going to do the right thing as best as I know how, come what may. And it was so freeing to be in that situation where I'm just going to give it up to God. And, if I go to prison, like we actually had a plan. My wife and I, we developed a plan when they were early on threatening court martials, and people were starting to get commission of a serious offense on their DD 214s. Like that's actually pretty serious. I mean, people, that's assaults, that's burglaries, that's larcenies. Those are serious things that they usually give that commission of a serious offense for. So early on, there was a real threat. Court martial for commission of a serious offense comes with the real possibility of prison time. And so, for some of us, more senior, more vocal, the thought is they're already doing unlawful things. What's to stop them from making an example of me or some of the more senior people? So my wife and I built a plan. Okay, if I end up getting court-martialed and have to go to prison, I'll serve my time. You take the kids to where this family is located, and then I'll swing hammers and dig ditches when we're out. Like that's the level of conviction, the level of abandonment to the will of God, where I had to get mentally to the place where I felt free to be vocal and try to do the right thing by all of this. But it's not for everybody. Everybody has different strengths and weaknesses, and character and nature and nurture that we all talked about earlier in the show. It just happened to be mine.
The kind of virtues that you have and that you've displayed, they're the kind of virtues that everyone can cultivate. And it just so happened that you'd spent your life cultivating those virtues. And so you were in a position to be able to do that. But I think everybody can cultivate those virtues, and try and find
through a lot of failure
and cultivate it. Exactly. Yeah, because that's
a lot of failure.
That's how we learn. That's how
a lot of sin to overcome in my own life.
But yeah, I as soon as I was through that disorienting first thing where it's like all of a sudden I realized that they were violating the law and infringing upon religious freedom, and violating the Constitution, that was game. It's like this, it's like you said, there's never a more clear opportunity to fulfill our oaths. Because with, coming out of Afghanistan, it's like, was the global war on terror, did that support and defend the Constitution? I don't know. I think that's pretty arguable. But this, I don't think it was arguable. I think it was
Yeah, this
pretty
was
straightforward.
this
And
was blatantly
it was a good
obvious.
opportunity. Yeah, it was a good opportunity. And it continues to be a good opportunity because they're still kind of playing games. But I don't want to run too long. And there's one thing I really wanted to ask you about, sir. Have you read Boyd, the fighter pilot that changed the art of war?
I have not read that in its entirety, but I've read a lot of articles about that. I mean, you don't go through Air University, JPME, the Joint Professional Military Education, without getting exposure to it and reading a lot of articles about it. So I have some exposure, but I have not actually read it.
The reason I wanted to ask is because from what I understand from talking to you previously, you got out for a period of time and you worked as a civilian in the Pentagon. Is that correct?
A civilian for the Navy, yes. I was not at the Pentagon. I was
Okay.
I was in Norfolk doing basically future weapon systems testing, designing the tests and analyzing test data, that kind of thing.
Okay, so the reason I brought up Boyd is because of that whole him and his acolytes in the military reform movement, right? So him fighting against brass, who typically they want to take a weapons platform or a new weapon system or a new vehicle, and they want to load it down with gold plate, make it multi-purpose, multi-mission, so that it totally gets divorced from the original purpose of the project. And the way that the book and the author of the book characterize it is like the Pentagon and that whole process is really just, it's incentivized in a way to shuttle money to defense contractors, not to try and produce material that is effective at keeping Americans safe and making our military, increasing our military's capacity and capability. And so I wanted to ask you, just discuss, if you're, whatever you're willing to discuss in terms of your time in that position, and anything that you noticed, especially given your personality, and your convictions, and you being a man of principle. I'm just very curious to get your perspective on that time, kind of in that world.
Yeah, I appreciate the question. So there I was, lowly lieutenant, and in the Navy, that's a captain, right? So I'm an 03, more senior 03, but I was given responsibility to be the operational test director for the first ever operational test of the Littoral Combat Ship Surface Warfare Mission Package, right? This is the mission set that they would put on the Littoral Combat Ship to make sure it can do surface to surface engagements and protect against all the various surface platform type threats, and it requires some air defense capabilities and some things like that, right? So as part of that, we developed measures of performance and measures of effectiveness, and we're going out there and we're gathering test data and doing all that. But what really bothered me, and there's no way for me to impact this as a lowly lieutenant. I have a job to do. I have test metrics to go capture. We have to do full power runs and measure all kinds of stuff on the ship and its ability to fight in an operational environment, because that's the level of testing. We're no longer in the lab. We go test on the water against, in some cases, remote controlled threats and that kind of stuff, right? And what really bothered me for the whole thing, it just seemed like wasted effort, wasted energy. Because I knew, being a destroyer sailor before this particular job, that the destroyers, they're incredibly capable. They are incredibly buoyant, which matters for the Navy. You flood particular compartments, you actually make the destroyer more buoyant. I mean, there are things that you can. I mean, it's hard to sink one of these things if it's fought right. And it's incredibly capable in every mission area that you'd want, in air defense, and surface to surface. It's a great platform. I love the destroyer. And they're getting cheaper. They're getting cheaper and cheaper the more we pump them out, because you're not developing something new, which costs a ton of money. It goes to your Pentagon gold plating, shoveling money towards the military industrial complex problem, right? And so I'm seeing this, having been a destroyer sailor, and I'm looking at the massive mountain of problems as a little lowly lieutenant, and there's almost nothing I can do to impact it. But there are deep problems in how we do defense acquisitions, because with the littoral combat ship, there were two competing bids, right? You had a Northrop Grumman, and you had, and I'm drawing a blank right now, but you had another company with a design, right? And so the Pentagon, Congress, did not even down select between the two competing bids. They said, okay, we'll just take both of them, right? It's money for more people in more states. We keep two different production lines going. And oh, by the way, when you develop these two different surface warfare mission packages, or the submarine warfare mission package, or the air defense, augmentation or whatever, you have to develop it for both classes of ships. The designs are completely different. Two different companies that did not interact with
is completely different, right? So that's all sunk cost, because it costs a lot in research and development that for what's essentially the same capability. Like, you're developing independently developing and paying for technology that ends in the same place, but now costs twice as much because you're doing it in two parallel lines of effort.
Oh yeah, and you're not even developing capability that doesn't exist out there in the fleet right now.
Because the destroyer could already do the job.
The destroyer could already do the job. I mean, you might have an argument for some of the mine warfare capability they wanted to put on the littoral combat ship, but all you'd have to do, super cheap, is just develop a package you could put out on the destroyer. I mean, it would just be so simple, and we would have saved hundreds of billions of dollars that could have been used for any kind of social, thing that they wanted to help Americans who needed help for. I mean, think about the waste and the programs that we could have done domestically. I mean, it's insane.
I gotta imagine, as that senior 03, you got to be sitting there thinking, where's the 06s, 07s, 08s? Like, do they not know what a destroyer can do? Do they not, like, where are they? And
well, the 06s are not there. I mean, as we have learned, they're saluting and saying "aye, aye, sir," and marching to whatever tune they're told to march to, right? That's what we're seeing from most of that level. I mean, the 07s, the 08s, it feels like the same thing, until they can get that third star and actually get to policy and political interactions, and then and at that point, they're shoveled off to go be on boards of these defense contractors. So.
And that's the concern. It's like, do they end up on the board of Northrop Grumman? After that, they were instrumental in ensuring that they got the two different paths approved. For the two different packages. So what? I got to imagine that caused a lot of cognitive dissonance. How did you piece that together? Like, what did you come away with that experience? Like, how did you make sense of that? Did you think, how can we find a way ahead as a country, like, when we're doing things like this? Because the way I react when I see stuff like that is I ask, what am I not seeing? When there's something that's that big and that obvious, that's costing hundreds of billions, where are all the other instances of that? Or what about the instance here that's 10 million here or 100 million there? And I get to being suspicious that that's our entire federal government.
It is.
Nothing is really coordinated in order to do the job that it's supposed to do. It's because the incentives don't require it. And if you can have people whose role and responsibility is making sure that process works right, and all we can rely on is their integrity, and their principles as leaders. Now I have no confidence that the people at those levels have those things. And there's plenty of evidence to indicate that that's the case at this point. What's the way ahead? Are those any of the kinds of thoughts that you had? I mean, I don't want to put words in your mouth. I'm just kind of curious because that was earlier on in your career. How did you square that?
So, there is a certain amount of, that cognitive dissonance might be strong. It's acknowledging that, hey, there is some thing here that's not right, but it's going to require, voting in members of Congress to fix this thing, who are going to do what's best for America and individual American citizens, as opposed to what might be best for the defense lobby, or the various defense lobby organizations, right, that are funding those campaigns. It's a pretty vicious cycle. So I don't. At some point, mentally, as being at that time a lowly lieutenant, and now as a, I feel even more lowly as a lowly 05, because I'm not able to impact policy concerns any more than I have, with my various COVID fighting stuff publicly, which minimal impact it feels sometimes.
I think it had a significant impact, sir.
I appreciate that, but I mean, God gives us the tools, and we can do only the best we can do. And I think, I think it's God meeting us halfway sometimes to make those things more impactful than they would have been. But for me, how I dealt with that mentally is kind of, hey, I'm going to just pull my best Cincinnatus impression and go find a farm somewhere and focus on my family and raise my food. That is kind of mentally where, I often get when faced with things that we just cannot fix, because, we have half the country, right, or more. They don't share the same values anymore. And, they want a world where, apparently, we want socialist stuff, and we want to not be responsible for where we're at right now in the world, and blame everybody else, and have government replace, replace our own ability to think and rule everything. So that's the situation we're in. We've got to. I think the solution. I mean, I'm a Christian man.
That's what I was just gonna ask. Where do we go from here?
I have my thoughts on it, my private thoughts about it that I'll make them public, I guess. But we turn back to God. That's the only answer. That's the only possibility as a people, as a nation. And when we do that, then you're going to start seeing that impact the type of people that end up rising to the top of leadership levels. It's probably a slow, long process, because it's been a slow regression. We talked about, we're not stagnant in human nature. It's been a slow regression as a nation to the value systems that are now accepted in most places in our country. So the fix to that is probably going to take a long time, but I think it has to start with turning back to God. Now, it's my private opinion as a Christian man, and what I'm going to strive to do for myself and my own family, because I've had plenty of my own sin out there. So I'm not going to throw any first stone, but I do know what I have to do to try to make it right, and that's turn back to God.
I respect that, and I wholeheartedly agree with it as well. I definitely don't think as a nation. I just remember, like, back in the 90s, like, to hear somebody say that they were an atheist, it was like they said a curse word. You're like, what? It was just so, like, what do you mean you don't believe in God? Like, that's insane, right? And now it's the complete opposite, right? If somebody says that they're a believer in God, whatever God that they choose to, or whatever religion that they choose to follow, I don't think it really matters, because they're instantly viewed as, a crazy person, a radical, like, what do you mean? You believe in you believe in something other than we came from absolute nothingness? It's like, yeah, kind of. But I really think that the world, I can't say the world, the nation has definitely gone backwards. You know, we've gone away from God, more into in whatever you want to imagine your idea of God of being, whether it's goodness or positivity, or like a heavenly being that urges you to do good, whatever. We've gotten away from it because it seems like we only do bad, or maybe not do bad, but like popular opinion now is to like be to enjoy like bad things or immoral things or believe in immoral ideologies and stuff like that. And I'm just like, yeah, I feel you on that for sure.
I mean,
Yeah,
I'll
we
say,
kind of become a little bit of a decadent culture, and a bit hedonistic, and we're trying to say that at this point, those things are good and they should be valued and they should be respected. I just don't think we can ever respect sin.
Yeah, the virtues are vices, and the reverse is true. We're giving in to our base desires, those shadow sides of all of our predilections, is somehow a good thing. I'll give pushback being not traditionally religious. Like, it's not really pushback, it's just a perspective that because I think what Rodney said was funny, how in the 90s it was like, you said you're atheist and people were like, oh my God, what? Being one of those people back then, I can tell you that's the case. I don't think it's something that should have ever been normalized. It's a very abnormal position to have. I don't think that it is it's ever going to resonate with most people. And there is a tremendous danger in atheism to get wrapped around the axle of materialism and deny a higher order of value of things, even if that comes from yourself.
Right.
Like, so if part of the solution is getting people into office that can resist the temptations, the carrot and the stick combination of the intelligence community coming after you as the stick if you don't play ball, and the carrot of lucrative book deals, getting reelected,
Lining your pockets,
sweet lobbying gigs, after you transition. That carrot and stick combination, how can you resist that if you are a materialist? Right? If you don't believe that, I guess I'm a materialist in a way, but that material comes together to create something higher. There is purpose. Like, our lives have purpose,
right?
And it's not just to consume. It's not just to be comfortable. And I do think that atheists in general are very vulnerable to being seduced by that idea, that life is all about reducing suffering and being comfortable and content and happy and satisfied. It's satisfying your appetites, and it's like that's not it. We could all be in a zoo then and not be free, and then it wouldn't matter. But all these things that and I think that people that say that they're religious, that say that they're Christian, I think that their minds have been infected by this materialism as well, to the extent that it's very easy for them to. Well, I won't say that it's easy. It's very difficult to resist those temptations and to resist the easy life, and to take the more difficult, challenging path. And I think in order to do it, you have to have that self-awareness. And I think that's for people that it's easy to resist, like sir, in this case with how it was just like game on for you. It's because you know yourself. You know yourself.
You have to identify something more important than just yourself.
Yeah. And so it's
Yeah.
like you could be in prison, they could do whatever to you, you know,
Right.
like that short-term discomfort and pain can never outweigh the long-term destruction of your soul
Right.
that acting against your purpose would entail.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Yeah,
Does that make sense?
it does. I mean, I think to have the approach that that I took to this, I mean, you would have to have an eternal outlook on things, or
Right.
you'd be insane, right? Like
Yeah.
it would be crazy if I didn't think that, hey, my soul's going to live on forever after this, so I better make this one count. This is my one chance.
Yeah. Right. That's interesting. I always love hearing people's views. I'm very interested in like religion and theology and philosophy and any other thing, any other brand you want to attach to the deeper mysteries of the human mind and religion and the true nature of humanity, I guess, is very interesting stuff. And I definitely think that like people need to have a certain connection with that to be a good leader, because otherwise, if there's nothing that they hold in higher regards than themselves, then they're always going to come from a selfish perspective. You know what I mean? At least in my opinion, right? In order to not be selfish, you have to hold something at a higher importance than your own thoughts, self, emotions, feelings, whatever. Because if you don't, then you are the most important person in your life, and you only live for yourself, and you only live to please yourself, and you hold nothing higher than yourself. So
I think just like fair weather friends, there's fair weather leaders. And I think
yeah,
in our military, I mean, it extends beyond the military, but when times are easy and you're not being challenged, you don't necessarily have to be virtuous and have put the effort in. Like you can just kind of fall into things, and you can look like a good leader, and you can perform the functions. I think what really separates true leadership, because people don't need leaders until times are hard, until they're under threat, until things are dangerous and volatile. That's when people need leadership the most, and that's when it really matters. And under those circumstances, when it matters, having principles and conviction and all these things, um, it becomes so critical. But yeah, I relate to that. I know I'm kind of jumping back, sir, but I relate to that idea of just kind of like trying to hunker down and go and find a farm somewhere, do the Joel Salton thing, get into permaculture. But why not do both? It's like we're trying to get leaders into positions that have these values, that can resist the temptation to, resist that short-term pleasure for the long-term pain of cognitive dissonance and destruction of soul. Getting those people into those positions, and then simultaneously building community, being a leader within your community, building those parallel structures up, in case that's ends up being an unachievable goal, or it doesn't end up being achieved. I don't know. Any thoughts on that, sir?
Yeah, well, for now, God has called me to serve, and I will do that to the best of my ability until my country asks me to leave, in whatever form that ask happens to come. So, yeah, I mean, it would be nice, retire and farm and focus on just family type stuff issues, but that's not what I'm called to do right now. So
right.
maybe that'll be a soon future.
What would
But yeah.
So what would be your message to the world? Like if there was, one thing that you could say, assuming that millions and millions of people and not just 27 are going to watch this video, what would you say to them to urge humanity, or to urge the nation, or urge just a single individual? Doesn't really matter. What's your message?
Well, I mean, it's the most important thing. Jesus Christ is the answer, period. Exclamation mark, whatever else you could do to emphasize that. That's my, my own personal salvation, the salvation of the world. He's the Lord of history. That's, if there was one message that I could hope would resonate with even one person, or maybe just me, but that's the one message I would say. And then for those who want to find out, well, how would we serve? How would we further that particular kingdom of God? I would say, we were given a document passed down by our founding fathers, and the Constitution that they fought, bled for, and passed down for our liberty and freedom. We need to be the heirs of that great gift, and we need to fight for it, because it is being dismantled right now. The government has encroached on freedoms to the point where there are pretty much no further avenues of retreat. I'm sorry, but that was the breaking point for me.
Right.
And the key indicator that it's gone too far, everybody, this is ridiculous. My bodily integrity is apparently no longer my own. There is no further retreat from that. Where else are we going to go? In the Founding Fathers' day, are you guys familiar with the Third Amendment? The Third Amendment was all about we cannot quarter foreign troops in American homes, right? Why would they put that particular amendment in the Constitution? Well, they actually faced the quartering of troops in their homes, right? Now, I don't think the Supreme Court has ever had to adjudicate an issue over the Third Amendment. It's never come up. But had the British been chasing people down with medical treatments that they either didn't want or didn't need, and were forcing on, you better believe the Founding Fathers would have put an amendment in there protecting individual medical freedom. So if I have any message for folks about the Constitution and fighting for constitutional rights, it's that the Constitution did two things. It established the form of government we have, but it also restricted and limited that government. We've forgotten about the second half. That government is supposed to be, the government is supposed to be limited, and they have now encroached into everything. The tentacles are everywhere, and now it has impacted individual bodily integrity. It's a bridge too far. We need a Third Amendment moment, and we need to make sure that we put the defenses up where the Founding Fathers would have and say, no, too far, limit the government back where it's supposed to be. It's useful, it's needed. We need the government. We need a strong federal government. I'm not disagreeing with any of this, but it's gone too far in this area, and it needs to be stopped.
Yeah, I agree.
So, sir, we'll close up and then cut the recording so we can say our proper goodbyes. But before we do that, is there any chance you want to talk about your upcoming book?
Thank you for that opportunity. I'm probably not quite ready for that yet, but it is coming. It is coming. And a lot of the ideas we talked about here will be coming out in that. I appreciate you mentioning it, but it's just another effort on my part to stand upon my own First Amendment, freedom of speech, to say pretty much what I just told you. Too far, too much.
Does it got a specific title for people to be on the lookout for, or a certain time frame people be watching out for it?
I'll tell you this. I promise you, when we're ready, I will come back on and I will share. I will share the book with you, with your audience. But I hope it will be explosive, and I hope it will help change the national conversation. But thank you for mentioning it. But soon, very soon.
Okay. Yeah, well, we'd love to have you on again when the time comes, and even to dive if you got some more thoughts or stuff that you want to say, stuff that you'd like our audience to hear, you're more than welcome to come back on at any time. You know, you can guide the conversation. We can guide the conversation. You got certain stuff you want to talk about? Absolutely. Come on. Just feed our audience just the knowledge that you have of where to go from here, you know. And we would love to have you back on if the opportunity ever comes again. So
well, thank you. They've probably been subjected to enough of my thoughts already. Maybe we should have mercy on them, but thank you very much for that. The very kind words.
Thank you. All right. We ready to close it up then, Grant?
Yep. Thank you, sir. Thanks so much for joining us. I really appreciate your time and really appreciate you sharing your thoughts with us.
Yeah, I enjoyed it.
Yeah, thank you both. I appreciate what you're doing. You're putting good stuff out in the world. Keep it up.
Thank you. Have a good day.